I guess you love movies. I do too. Hi guys, and welcome back to another video on my channel. Today is another movie review, and that is for Longlegs, a new horror movie directed by Oz Perkins, the son of Anthony Perkins, the star of Psycho, and Norman Bates, the iconic performance and actor. He actually starred in Psycho 2, I believe, as a young Norman Bates. He's done some terrible movies and also directed some pretty good movies from what I've heard. I've not actually seen any of his films previously, but I have heard of The Black Coat's Daughter, which is another sort of satanic type of horror film that I'm looking to watch in the near future. I actually wanted to watch it before I watched this movie, but I couldn't find it anywhere to stream. I didn't quite have time, but it will definitely be a film that I watch soon. This movie stars Nicolas Cage and Michael Monroe, and it's kind of like a psychological horror thriller. It follows the investigation of a very unique serial killer. It's set in sort of like the 90s, I believe. It's a period piece, and this serial killer is like a voyeuristic killer. He isn't actually present at the scenes, seemingly. And when Lee Harker, a rookie FBI agent, is brought onto the force to help with this case, they have next to no evidence against this guy. There's no physical evidence at any of the scenes, but it is clear that somebody else is involved in these killings. These letters are left at the scene with a sort of bizarre dialect and language on the note which cannot be deciphered at this point, but the only thing that they can decipher is who is leaving these notes, and there is a name, and that name is Longlegs, and he kills over a long period of time, decades, and they're no closer to finding him. But when they do bring Harker onto the case, who's played by Michael Monroe, who obviously starred in another great horror movie called It Follows, they start to uncover a lot of information about this case, and as we go along we start to uncover more information about the killer himself and his motives, but also about our main character and what she has been through her life, because things start to come to the surface as the movie goes along. And I kind of want to leave it at that, because there's not a lot in the marketing for this movie in terms of the plot, in terms of what goes on. It's very much mood in terms of like the intensity of this film. In terms of what you see in the trailers is very much mood only. And from that alone, I was in. And I've got to admit that this movie kind of blew me away a little bit. I have next to no negatives. This movie may be slightly thin on plot, and I'll get down to that later in the review, but in terms of everything around it, it is a technical masterpiece. The direction by Oz Perkins is fantastic. There's few movies that have a mood like this, a sense of dread like this. Its visual style very much reminded me of David Fincher, and movies of that ilk. Obviously I've got Silence of the Lambs in the background here. That's more like plot. In terms of the plot, this movie is very much similar to that. A rookie FBI agent, a female FBI agent, tracking down a serial killer. But in terms of the visual motifs, Zodiac was a movie that I was definitely reminded of. That use of kind of like oranges and sort of dark yellows, and that sort of musky feel to it, kind of a grimy feel in terms of the texture of the movie, and it's very ominous. The sound design is fabulous. Watching this in a theatre, it's just like it's such a brilliant experience. It's a quiet movie in many senses, but in terms of the way it uses sound to create kind of that tension, it's ominous. Everything has a sort of like a reverberation to it, and it kind of is like symbolic of the entire movie, where one action leads to many reactions, and one thing, you know, just because something ends doesn't mean it's forgotten, and that's kind of echoed through the entire film. So the technical aspects, like I said, fabulous, but it's not just that. The performances are great. Michael Monroe gives a great performance, reserved, but kind of slowly builds to kind of this hyperbolic tension by the end. There's clearly something wrong. There's clearly something that's gone on with her, because she doesn't really act like a normal person for long periods. Her partner is basically just a normal guy, And she is clearly very awkward and has clearly got some social issues. But as the movie goes along, her relationship with her mother sort of starts to develop, and you start to realise what's gone on in her past. Her mother's deeply religious, and for long periods of the movie, on the phone calls that they have, she's constantly saying, "Did you say your prayers today?" You know, she's definitely trying to push religion back on her, and it seems like that she's lost that kind of faith across her life. And she sort of just buried herself into her work, and there's clearly something that has gone on that she's buried, and that is something that comes back later in the movie, but obviously I will not spoil. But the main thing that in the marketing we didn't really know a lot about, we knew Nick Cage was in the movie, and we knew Nick Cage was probably the serial killer, just from the sort of voiceovers in the trailer, but his performance is one that will be divisive, I think. It's a performance that only Nick Cage can produce, and I think a lot of people have said maybe you shouldn't have cast Nick Cage, maybe he was too obvious, maybe, you know, he's too memeable. I feel like we maybe have grown past the Nick Cage as a meme thing, and I'm glad that we've done that as a society, because I genuinely think that Nick Cage, when he's given the right material, is a phenomenal actor. And a performance that he gave a couple of years ago is completely counter to this in a movie called Pig, which is deeply personal to me, and eventually I might do a video on it. It's one of my favourite movies of the decade. He gives a nuanced and complex performance, which is very quiet, which is completely different to this movie. He is insane and bordering on hilarious at points if you took it out of context, but when you watch it within the context of this movie, he is terrifying. And he gives a very unique performance. He basically swings for the fences, and only Nick Cage could pull this off, and only Nick Cage has the bravery to do the things he does in this movie, not caring whether people think it's stupid or not, and he finds a level of disturbing that I haven't seen in a long time from a movie Psychopath. There's definite relations to a movie like Silence of the Lambs, but in its main Psychopath, the one that we're following, not Hannibal Lecter, but he brought something unique to it, and I really enjoyed his performance overall. Like I said earlier in the review, a lot of people's main criticism with this movie is the simpleness of plot. It's predictable. Oh, you can see it's going to happen. I'm not against a movie where it sets things up and is paid off in a kind of basic way in terms of like how you would expect it to be paid off. There's a lot of movies that are made nowadays in the sort of post-Game of Thrones world where people think they have to shock everyone. They have to constantly create twists that are unexpected. And you know what? Sometimes things that are unexpected aren't earned. And Game of Thrones did this towards the end of its run. M. Night Shyamalan continues to do this, where a whole movie is built around a twist and the entire movie is null and void because the twist is everything. But setting up payoffs is actually that you can maybe see coming, but are executed exceptionally well. I would much rather see that. And this is a movie where, yes, the plot is not particularly complex. It is not particularly groundbreaking in terms of what actually unfolds, but in terms of the way that this movie is executed, there are a few movies in recent memory that have done this better. It feels like peak Fincher to me. Like in terms of the technicality of it, the tone of it, it's so dark and brooding, and there's that dread over the whole film. And I love atmosphere. I love movies that can create great atmosphere, and few movies in recent years have done that for me. When I walked out of the theatre, I felt genuinely disturbed by what I'd seen, from the imagery, from the direction, from the performances, and everything that I saw on a technical and performance aspect. The plot was kind of the least important part of it, but there was definitely some really great imagery, and there was lots of great themes through the film, the sort of to and fro between good and evil, the reverberation of trauma through generations, and a final shot which will leave you with a feeling like, yes, maybe this moment in time is over, but this trauma, it will last forever. So that's my review of Longlegs. I hope you enjoyed it. I absolutely adored this movie. It was one of my favourite theatrical experiences of the year, I've got to say. Along with Dune 2, I think it's probably my favourite movie of the year. If you haven't seen it already, I would highly recommend it if you're a horror or psychological thriller fan. It does the movies to my right and left justice. It's not a copycat killer of a movie. It is unique in of its vision, and yes, maybe the plot is something you've seen before, but it is definitely unique in its execution of it. I'll definitely be checking out more Oz Perkins movies in the future. I might do a review of Black Coat's Daughter at some point on the channel. If you'd like to see that, definitely hit that like button and drop it in the comment section below. And yeah, so hope you enjoyed this video, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Goodbye.